doesn't have it. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Hello. My name is Elizabeth Gessel, and I am the Director of Public Programs at Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. And I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the challenging circumstances we are all in, and I hope everyone in the audience today is safe and healthy. I welcome you to our MOAD online community resilience programming, and we'll begin by stating our position. MOAD stands in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. We honor and mourn the senseless murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, Rayshard Brooks, and so many others who have lost their lives at the hands of police brutality and racial injustice, including those whose names we do not know. As well as many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those who forcefully were brought to this continent. Our institutions were founded upon exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples whose land we are located. With deep respect, MOAD acknowledges that even in virtual space, our people, our work, and our network servers are on native lands, and thanks the indigenous people of the Bay Area who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. Today, we will address the very expansive topic of race, equity, and police accountability in San Francisco, and we are grateful to have extremely talented people here to guide us through it. We will have time for questions from the audience at the end of the conversation, so please, if you have questions, type them into the Q&A box. I will now introduce our very fine panelists. We'll start with Sheryl Evans Davis, who is the Executive Director of the San Francisco Human Rights Commission. Over the last year, Davis has been helping build out an equity framework with community stakeholders and city departments in San Francisco. Davis earned her BA from San Francisco State, an MPA from the University of San Francisco, and is currently pursuing an EDD from the University of Southern California. We also have with us Paul David Henderson, who is a nationally recognized expert in criminal justice reform, a veteran prosecutor and progressive champion for social justice. The former chief under Kamala Harris and then deputy chief of staff for former Mayor Ed.D, Paul David Henderson currently serves as executive director of the San Francisco Department of Police Accountability. Director Henderson is respected as a credible voice in decision-making and champion for progressive change. We also have Shakira Simley. She is the inaugural director for the newly established Office of Racial Equity for the City and County of San Francisco. Shakira received her undergraduate degree with honors from the University of Pennsylvania and received her master's degree at the University of Gastronomic Sciences in Italy via a Fulbright Research Scholarship. She is recognized widely for her food work. She has been recognized as change maker by the Berkeley Food Institute, Quesa, Cherry Bomb, and Zagat. The daughter of a social worker and granddaughter of a Black Panther, Shakira was born and raised in Harlem, New York, and has lived in San Francisco for over 12 years. And moderating the discussion today is Ed.D. Gregory. He is a first-generation, third-year communications studies major with minors in biology and African American studies, and is on the pre-medical track at the University of San Francisco. On campus, Michael is a team lead for the orientation team, the GO team, University Ambassador, member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, and an inaugural member of the Black Scholars Program. Passionate about serving both USF and the greater San Francisco community, you will find him active in a host of organizations and opportunities. So please join me in welcoming this very illustrious panel.
Awesome. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. Let's go ahead and maximize this time and jump right in. Thank you, panelists, Director Simley, Director Henderson, and Director Davis. My first question is, how are you in your work elevating communities of color who have been severely impacted by the ongoing pandemic?
Well, I guess I will jump right in and get started. I wanted to share, I'm going to share a couple of slides with you just about that. This is just a quick summary of some of the work that we've been doing over the last few months at the Human Rights Commission, some of the groups that we've been supporting, some of the work that we've been leading to address just what you said, communities of color and folks that are most impacted by the pandemic. Two highlights for me have been being able to work with the Latino Task Force, being a part of this developing group of folks that have been very intentional and focused, leading the work around the study and the mission, leading the work around food distribution, and really demanding the allocation of resources to support their community. And most recently working to launch the Mega Black SF with community partners, and really trying to talk about and highlight that Black people are not monolithic, but more megalithic, and that we are the foundation and helping to build the structures that have made not just the country, but the world. One of the highlights for me, this has been being able to provide space for artists, but to also really be focused in amplifying messaging that resonates with the community and prioritizing that. And so this is one of the partners that we work with, Brother Malik from Bayview, who was able to help us really think about how we do that. We did some caravans throughout communities and neighborhoods with the faith-based leaders, with community leaders, and distributed face coverings and hand sanitizer and gloves, and that was really well received by folks. These are more images of that. We work with the school district on the Equity Studies Task Force and launched some of that work. So again, just really being focused on what some of the needs were, prioritizing community voice and building out in that way, I think is how we've really been intentional about centering community voice and not coming in and telling people what they need to do, but listening and being responsive in that manner.
Thank you.
Now, see, this is why I don't sit on panels with Sheryl Davis, because she comes prepared and has slides and is all organized.
You should have called me.
It's all colored, and I'm just here talking.
But you got beautiful artwork behind you.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I got so at the DPA, for those that don't know, the agency investigates complaints made against law enforcement agencies. It's currently the police and the sheriff's department. We also make policy recommendations, and we audit the police department as well. And so some of the things that we have done specifically to reach out to communities, and specifically communities of color, are to try and make our services more known and available. And the agency has been around since the 80s, but I think a lot of people either weren't sure what the agency was, and to the degree they knew what the agency was, they didn't know how to get in contact with us and to implement our services or to use us. And so I've been the director at this agency for now almost 3 years now. And a lot of that time has been focusing on building out an outreach component, which didn't exist in the way that I had envisioned, where it was actually connected to the neighborhoods and to the individuals that most need the services. And so that means reaching out to try and find the individuals that have the most to say and are disparately impacted by law enforcement contacts. And obviously that has meant, at least in San Francisco, a closer working connection with immigrant communities, a close working connection with communities of color, as we try and make sure that we are accountable to bring accountability to law enforcement agencies and to bring the voices to the table. Some of the ways that can be measured currently are in some of the working groups that we have and some of the recommendations that have been made by the Department of Justice, speaking to justice reforms and police reforms and civilian oversight. And so that's a broad overview of the work that's being done and a broad generalization of some of the connections that we're trying to make, specifically with communities of color and disenfranchised communities here in San Francisco.
Thank you. Director Smiley?
Thanks, Director Henderson. I'm going to hop in here if it's okay. What's that? Oh.
I think you're frozen.
So can you all hear me okay? Yeah. Oh, man.
Yes.
Hello?
Yeah, we got you.
Yeah, we hear you.
Great. So from the beginning of the pandemic, and thank you so much, Dr. Davis, for highlighting your work. I think it's so important to see. I think sometimes we're so inside the work, we never get to talk about the work and share that. So I'm really glad for this opportunity today. And from the beginning, the Human Rights Commission and our staff and the Office of Racial Equity jumped in regards to this pandemic. And at the beginning, folks thought that COVID would be level the playing field, but COVID is racist as all hell. Like it is, and we see that in how it disproportionately impacts Black and Brown folks, and also in the spreading and discrimination. And from the beginning, at the beginning of the pandemic, we knew we had to center equity, and working with Mayor London Breed, Director Davis asked that I step in to become the equity officer within the city's emergency operations center. And for the past 3.5 months, I've been deployed as an essential worker, just like many other folks in the city, to help make sure that we're centering equity in the response so that our folks in our neighborhoods don't get left behind. And what that looks like has been fighting for equally accessible testing sites in Tenderloin, Fillmore, Western Addition, Bayview, and in the Mission District. It's been making sure we have contact tracing, which is a key part of COVID, and following up with folks, making sure they have the care they need in their language. And there's people that look like them and trusted messengers to support them. It means making sure that people have access to key things that, Mayor Breed has worked hard to make sure we have a more holistic approach to this pandemic, such as hotel rooms, and access to food delivery, access to PPE. It's making sure that we're just aggregating data. Data in COVID tells a really powerful story, and we can't forget that. And we have to make sure that we're being vigilant and understanding who gets to recover from COVID and who does not. So that's some of the efforts from the Office of Racial Equity, and we'll be releasing a progress report today that will highlight the efforts that we've made in COVID. And also we'll be happy to share later on today COVID Racial Equity Response and Recovery Toolkit that everyone here can use to help inform their decision making when it comes to responding to the COVID pandemic. Thanks. And sorry about my video. So wonky over here, my bootleg internet.
All good. We appreciate your feedback. Please go ahead and drop that toolkit in the chat, because I know myself am looking forward to taking a greater look at it. You did segue perfectly into my next question, Shakira, if you'd like to be the first to answer. The question is how do we get folks who have privilege to not see it, who have the privilege to not see what's going on, and how do we get them to see the racism, the poverty, the mass incarceration, redistricting, all the things that are going on in our communities that are affecting disproportionately Black and Brown communities? I think Shakir probably lost us.
I think she's on mute, but let me just jump in and I can say,
Go for it.
Because I got a lot to say. So I think some of the issues are, I feel like I'm an advocate for a lot of the work that gets done on behalf of communities of color. And let me just say, just by context, that I'm from San Francisco. I'm a 4th generation San Franciscan from the Bayview Hunters Point area. And so I have my own perspectives about all of these things. And obviously, my background is as a trial lawyer, right? So I am an advocate. I want to present things. I feel like part of our roles in these positions and in the work that we do is to educate broader communities. And I think that speaks to the question that you raised of like what that process looks like. I frequently feel like the voice and the perspective that we bring specifically and purposefully when it's intentional on behalf of communities of color gets marginalized in broader conversations frequently from a variety of different areas. And rather than talking about what those instances are that I think many people can identify with as, what you bring into the room as the Black voice, or what you bring into the room as a woman or a person of color changes the dynamic of the message. I really try and focus on trying to take every opportunity I can and advantage of the opportunities I can to educate people with statistics and numbers. So you are entitled to not believe what I believe, but you're not entitled to challenge my facts and the statistics, because they lead the discussion, or they should lead the discussion. And I like to be armed with those things. And when I talk about the justification for my presence, when I talk about the validation for my work, and when I talk about the structures and support that we need in order to move the ball forward in these conversations, specifically dealing with race, I like to tie them and connect them to numbers. When we're talking about police reform, and again, I'm not saying that all the police are bad. I am saying that regardless of where we look throughout this country, that there is 19.3 times higher rates for use of force used against communities of color, and we have to talk about some of these numbers. And I just use use of force as an example, but these race disparities absolutely exist. And these aren't new fights, and they're not new conversations, because we've been in a fight against, or about trying to redefine justice for a long time. And so this is nothing new, but we have to be able to drill down and talk about what those disparities are all throughout our systems as they relate to detentions and stops by law enforcement agencies, as it relates to who is held in custody, as it relates to who gets charged, how people get sentenced, all of those things all along the road. And those disparities exist, but we can't address them without having information. So in order to, speaking to your initial question of how do I prepare and what do I try to do, I try to prepare myself with some of these facts and some of these statistics whenever I speak to a broad audience, because I think that's the cornerstone of how we find solutions. We can't fix what we don't talk about. And we have to talk about it, and from an informed perspective, and to know and to be armed ourselves with a lot of these facts and a lot of these statistics. For me, that's what I try to do, and that's what I try to bring to the table in order to move the ball a little bit forward, so that even when that audience may leave the room, they're leaving that room informed with facts that they know absolutely exist, so they don't get to diminish it or walk away from it and say that, well, that's just his experience, or that's probably not true, or that doesn't exist in my city or in my county, or I don't believe that these things could be actually taking place. So that's my answer for it.
I mean, I would add to that, because I hear you talking about experience and saying that, Paul. I think one of the things that in previous conversations that we've had about race, and I think that part of this is also a narrative and culture shift, right, in terms of how we tell our stories, or how we show up, or how we think about this. And so, I mean, we've had these conversations about how people refer to themselves. I'm a Black woman, or a Black man, or I'm Black and gay, or I'm Black and straight, and that the Black and versus just saying the part after the and, right? And in some way, owning and having that be a part of the identity, and not being ashamed of that identity, right? And recognizing and acknowledging that descriptor is actually more than a description of skin tone, that it actually talks about and denotes some of the data and the experiences and the pieces that we need to address. And I think, how do we have this narrative, this culture shift, right, to say and understand how people identify, and that in some ways that identification is, for me to be a Black woman in San Francisco has a very different meaning than when I was a Black woman at UC Davis, or a little Black girl in Texas, right? And a lot of what I learned in that experience in Texas has colored, for lack of a better, like how I see the world, right? And my expectations and how I move through that. But I will tell you, if I had never been in Texas, the idea of the privilege that I have right now compared to what my grandmother had, you couldn't have convinced me that it was privilege. I would have thought that I was owed that in some way, right? So I think that there's
Yes.
a disconnect in terms of how we see and understand things. I was just talking to somebody earlier about Martin Luther King Jr. and letter from a Birmingham jail, right? There is a level of privilege that Dr. King had in sitting in that jail. He made a decision, if we're honest, to go to jail. He knew he was going to be arrested. He's sitting in jail and he makes a decision to write to the white clergy, right? He wasn't worried about losing his job. He wasn't worried about his wife saying when he got home, oh, you went to jail, you got to go, I'm not gonna, like, he didn't worry about the stigma of incarceration, right? And so we've put these things on these narratives now, but we don't look at it and be like, he had a level of privilege. He wasn't worried about eating dinner when he got out, where he was gonna live, whether his wife was gonna leave him, right? There are all these different things that need to be unpacked, but we don't sometimes wanna have that conversation. And so I think it doesn't have to just be, because I appreciate you talking about mass incarceration, redistricting, all of those things impact, and race is a part of it, but there are different layers and levels, socioeconomic privilege, there's the geographic privilege, all of those things together, and we have to make people comfortable to say, privilege, we all experience some level of privilege.
Director Simley, we were just going over how do we get people who have the privilege to not see what's going on to see what's going on, if you'd have anything to add.
I mean, I think it goes with the old adage that, and I'm hoping you all can hear me now.
Yeah, go for it.
Oh my God. Okay. I'm gonna check my video.
Yeah, that might work.
Is that better?
Yes.
Oh my God. Okay. I think it goes with the old adage is if you are not outraged right now, then you are not paying attention. And I think it's important to understand that, you know, to uplift, you know, what Director Davis said, that we need to make sure we take an intersectional approach. And all, for me, like, I'm a US citizen, right? I am, and that's a complicated relationship for a Black person. We're coming upon July 4th. Like, I don't recognize that holiday. I recognize Juneteenth. However, as a documented person, the way in which I'm able to get a job, have a home, be educated is very different than folks who are not like me. But I, you know, firmly and proudly stand in my Black identity. I mean, that is my lens, that is my frame. And I'm also very much thinking, particularly from this office, is how do we make sure that we root out anti-Blackness at all levels? And in understanding how anti-Blackness and anti-Black racism is the reason why we're still here today, and the reason why folks are still taking to the streets, and the reason why, because we haven't done the work to unroot and dismantle that, you know, we're still swimming in issues that Black folks have been lifting up for decades. So I just wanted to put that piece out there, and, you know, I apologize for the technology issues I'm having, and I appreciate y'all's patience.
Oh, good. Thank you for just being here and showing up to the fullest extent.
Can I just say, because I think what you just said ties all of what we all three just said is part of the equation that we are taking for granted, that showing up, being in the room and exercising our voices is moving the ball forward. And it doesn't go without saying, because I wanted to say it, that when I show up in a room to talk, that changes the dynamic. When Sheryl Davis is on a panel in a room in a meeting, and the same thing with Shakira, it makes a difference. When you are selected as the moderator and you're a Black man, it makes a difference. And I'm always telling people, little steps make a difference, but this is why diversity matters, and this is why inclusionary agendas matter. And we have to defend them. We have to articulate why they're important. We have to be able to talk about affirmative action in ways that broader audiences can see and understand it. And if we don't, I don't want to rely on allies or anyone else to do it for me. To the degree I care about it and think that it's relevant, I can't ask someone else to care about these things that matter to me more than I do. And how I show that it's valuable to me is I talk about it. If I have a meeting, I want to address issues. If I don't see it on the agenda, I'll raise my hand and ask about it. And sometimes that makes me uncomfortable, but it's not going to make me uncomfortable because I care about it. And if it makes everyone else uncomfortable, at least we get to address it. And so I don't think that that's unique to this panel. I think the viewers and artists and everyone else are empowered in that same way with their community, with their friends, and with the audiences that they intermingle with every day to be able to move the ball forward just by being there and raising the conversations that heretofore they may not have been comfortable talking about, just to say, what's your opinion? Because here's mine, and you put it on the table. And you educate broad audiences just by taking those simple steps. So anyway, I just wanted to connect it.
No, but I appreciate you doing that, because I think, you know, Mike Hill represents that in so many ways. For me, like, this is the point that you made, not just, I like that you expanded it from just being in the room to actually saying something, right? Because I think that ultimately is the way, Mike Hill. So being in the space, like making a conscious decision to go to school in San Francisco and represent in a university at San, you know, here in the city, and to bring not just a global perspective to USF, but to also bring your very local perspective of what it is to be born and raised here, to grow up in the community here, and to do that as your true authentic self. And I think part of this is what I appreciate about, you know, and I know this is something Michael was going to talk about, like what I appreciate about the protest and the other is that it allows for people to show up as their authentic self, right? You put it on the cardboard, you put it on a poster, you put it on a sign, you're able to communicate something that challenges the status quo, or that amplifies or raises awareness about something, right? I think that those are the things. It's not always about coming in and preaching to someone, but, you know, the old folks used to say, like, you live it, right? Like the best witness or the best way to convert somebody is to not come in and beat them over the head, but just be a better person, like represent what it is that you want to see. So being in the room and speaking your truth, whether people accept it or not, that seed is planted, right?
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. Just to go a little bit deeper, I think the conversation around race inequity is challenging itself. It's scary for many individuals, and that's not excluding Black people or people of color from that situation. But how can we as a city and county of San Francisco continue to push this conversation, but not stop it at pushing it, but actually enacting it?
I see, you know, that a comment from Rico in the chat, and I think that Rico represents to me how we enact, right? It's not about policymakers, it's not about systems leaders, it is really about the community, the folks with the lived experience, the folks that are on the ground helping to advance this. Us sitting in a room coming up with ideas of like how to change the world doesn't mean diddly squat if the people on the ground do not support and are not with the movement. And I think what we're seeing right now is a movement of real people tired and ready for change. And we've got to get in line with that instead of trying to make it fit into, you know, as Shakira often talks about, trying to force the square peg in the proverbial round hole.
Thank you, Director Davis, for that. And I do want to lift up, there's so many native San Franciscans here and folks in the chat making yourselves known. Thank you for being here. You're still here. We lift you up. We see you. And we can't do this work and walk in this work without you. And one of the important things to me, I feel like I'm sitting in a really interesting place, coming from being a community organizer and yelling on the outside of City Hall to now working within city government and thinking about what can we actually do to, dismantle a system that it's not really meant or built for us. It's actually built against us and has been built on the exploitation, the pain, the trauma of Black and brown people, particularly here in San Francisco. But the system and this institution, city government, has a huge responsibility to the thousands of workers that it employs. San Francisco is one of the largest employers in the county, in the region. And, you know, the folks who had traditionally used city government as a way of, you know, lifting themselves up and their families from poverty, like those were hard fought gains won by Black and brown folks that, you know, we don't want to be eroded. But what does that look like now? And, you know, a mentor of mine says how sometimes city government is like a tanker in ice. and sometimes it's going in one direction. It takes a lot of work to push it elsewhere. But we are in the midst of an uprising that is pushing on governments to be more flexible, more nimble, more adaptive, and use this pandemic to do so, and against the backdrop of police reform. And as a younger person within city government, I want to take that mandate through the Office of Racial Equity to push government as far as we can to do right by its people. And one thing that we often say is with government and you know, from human resources or city attorney, we're often trying to solve for liability, but we're trying to solve here for justice.
Still there?
So.
Thanks, Shakira. I think Mike Hill might be frozen now.
Oh, it got me this time?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Zoom is racist. It's
Right.
silencing Black voices.
Yeah, we are silencing the Black voices. We could
They're trying to get me. They're trying to hold me down, y'all.
Well,
Am I
Paul,
back? Am I back?
We can see you, but we can't hear you. Now you're back. Now we can hear you. Okay.
Able to hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm gonna just pause video now. My next question, it kind of hits to what you have talked about with the Black and brown communities, and we know that they're being disproportionately affected by COVID at much higher rates. The conversation is blatant, it's apparent. Now, what is an equitable response to even reopening the economy, although COVID cases are still disproportionately affecting Black and brown communities? And as you see, showing very little improvement. Is the conversation even worth having?
I think we have to have the conversation. I mean, I think the willingness and, in fact, part of the urgency to reopen the economy is based on the cost associated disproportionately with communities of color. I mean, that's a lot of the conversations that go into that aren't going into the evaluations and the demands for us to, we need our services back. Well, who's doing those services? We need these restaurants open. Well, who's working in those restaurants? I need my Amazon packages delivered. Okay, well where are these jobs? And who is at these jobs and who is being impacted the most? These are valid questions. What I think of when we are dancing around talking about this watershed moment is we are coming to this evaluation about the response to COVID-19 at the same time that we're coming to this response about budgets, and the same time that we're having conversations about the economy that's just been declared to be in a recession. And it's compounded with the same time that we're having conversations about police. And this is not a perfect storm, but a crossroads for society to be made aware of all of these issues like race and the disparities associated with all of the topics that I've talked about, budgets and COVID response and police reform and justice reforms, and what our role is. We're all getting educated in new ways. And I think that these are valid discussions. You can't stop community from raising these issues that they're entitled to define, well, what is my city doing to address that it's more Black and brown people that are testing positive and that are getting sick and that are dying, and what response do we have about that? What are we doing, and how is that informing, or why isn't that informing the decisions that are being made about what my city and county's responses are? And where my dollars are going. And that's how it gets, I think they're all connected to similar things. And unfortunately, they're connected by race in a disparate way that harms communities of color. And so I'm so grateful that you asked the question, because I think we all have a different lens about how we answer that question, but it would be foolish for us not to raise that question, even if all we do is articulate it in a way so that people in other counties and in other cities that don't have panels like this can be raising the questions on their own to ask and Google and find out, or raise the question for their mayors, or raise the question for their chiefs of police, or raise the question for the folks that are responsible for these budgets, to start answering these questions with race intentionality. And that those aren't bad things. That does move the ball forward and moves it ahead for us all to be better informed.
You know, I'm looking, someone posted in the chat, I think that came to us, just about, you know, I've been known to say right now that Black people are trending, or Black Lives Matter is trending, and someone talked about they hope that non-Black allies are not using Black Lives Matter as a poetry in motion, kind of just something to recite. And I think that for me is, as we've been doing, you know, I know Paul and I need to discuss this, like what the reallocation of SFPD dollars look like. And we've been doing these community meetings to get input from folks. And as we have gone through this process, looking at the reports from 1993 and the reports from 2003 and the reports from 2009, where recommendations have been made to improve outcomes for people of color or people in low-income communities, and yet the investment has not been done. And so this idea and notion, you know, we've had a lot of conversations about people, there are a bunch of people that do not want to go back to normal because normal was not good, right? They were struggling, and everything that some people are starting to feel now, other folks were feeling before the pandemic, right? And I, you know, I have to say, I have found it quite interesting to hear the refrain of people saying we're battling two things, you know, we're battling two things right now. We're battling the pandemic and we're battling racism. I'm like, racism is not new in the last couple of months, right? Like that didn't just pop up, right? We didn't just catch that. You know, that has been a disease that has been slowly killing us and killing communities for centuries. And so part of this is, what is recovery? What is reopening? What is new normal? Because old normal wasn't that great. So I think part of this is, how are we actually changing? Wait, what's going to be innovative? We have the opportunity right now not to just reopen, but to rethink how we function. Right? We've done some things differently in the name of the pandemic. Let's continue to like think about how we do that, what that looks like moving forward.
Shakira, the people are speaking. They love you. They love when you talk. They want to hear you loud and clear.
Oh, thank you. I think that's my mom.
Okay. Hi, Mom.
That makes me so happy.
Mom has entered the chat. We love it.
Thank you.
Awesome. I think we spoke a little bit about my next question, but it's really about this idea of reallocating our dollars and how that's going to work. So really, how can we change in a way in which our dollars are allocated within the city in regards to the city entities, from parks to educational systems to defunding the police, for example?
Well, let me just say, first of all, that, you know, this is something that I've talked about in the past, and I get a lot of challenges, and because it gets misinterpreted, I think a lot, right? People hear comments like defund the police, and they make a presumption that what that means is that we don't want law enforcement. We is a general we about we community or we activists or whomever. But I think the reality is we all want public safety. Who doesn't want public safety? We just want it in a way that is race neutral and fair. We don't want it in a way that has all of these race disparities that are systemic into our processes coming along with it. And it's a false choice that we get one or nothing. Like, that's just not the reality. And I think it's those same questions that we are bringing to our budget analysis. It's those same questions that we're bringing to our COVID-19 responses of why can't we do this in a way that speaks to communities of color and makes us or forces us to cultivate and develop race neutral outcomes. Why can't we do that? And I think the solution to that is, one, having data collection, having data be transparent, and then having that data analyzed. Otherwise, you're just coming up with solutions that you hope could work. And we have an aspirational approach to these complex issues that, and to Director Davis's point, have been in existence for a long time. And part of the watershed moment I think that we're in is that in communities in broad ways are newly informed and armed with information in ways that they are no longer asking for general support or general help, right? This has been going on for decades. I think now people are asking for specific actions. We no longer want no-knock warrants being exercised by our police department. We no longer want an obscure budget that doesn't speak to these long-standing problems that we've had specifically in communities like communities of color or in our immigration communities. We want an answer to that. And it's a fair question to raise, because what's behind all of these solutions, or what's behind the perpetuation of these systemic problems, are our own dollars, right? These are our tax dollars that pay for these things. And it is fair for us to raise these issues and demand that those in power that are holding those dollars or dispersing those dollars make them more responsive to community wants and needs. And so I don't think it's unique to the budget, nor do I think it's unique to law enforcement or police budget, but they're absolutely connected. And I'm grateful just to be part of the discussions like this, because I think that that's how we start making a difference. That's how we start examining in a realistic way where our dollars are going, what are we getting for those dollars, and sharing voices so we have a more inclusionary agenda and a more inclusionary conversation about where those dollars need to go, so that we end up paying for what all communities need, not just what some communities have relied upon in the past.
I mean, I think, and I don't think I disagree with you, Paul. I think we're maybe in the same space and place, but I think one of the things I'm looking at the post where someone's like asking us to say the name Breonna Taylor, or this idea and notion of how we're doing this and who we prioritize or how. So I guess what I'm getting to is this idea of the data piece, because in terms of the solutions, I'm all about evidence-based practices and data, but the truth of the matter is we have been driven by data in our policies for far too long. And I think that we have silenced the people that probably have the ideas of how to redo this, right?
Yeah.
Or how to rethink it and how to do it in a very different way. And so my challenge is the system always wants us to prove that something will work before they will fund it. But the truth of the matter is, if we've never done it before, we don't know if it's going to work till we try it. And the problem is, there are some really great solutions out there that we've never tried because we don't want to try them because they haven't been proven to work, and they won't be proven to work until we try them and prove them. And so this cyclical kind of like just keep putting money into the same old hole and hoping that things are going to get better is not going to work.
Yep.
And I think part of this is we've got to figure out if we really want to be innovative, if we really want to try and do something different, and if we're willing to take the risk to do that. Because guess what? You know, in a lot of ways, could it actually be much worse than what we've already gotten?
And to your point, Director Davis, I think it really starts with some of the people we tend to neglect first, which is youth, college students, high school students. Even to add on to that, what would be your recommendation for students who are dedicated to this fight and who are starting to burn out? How do they avoid that burnout while still ensuring that they're showing up to these spaces, that they're having these conversations, that they're ensuring that change is going to come?
Well, you know, I'm all about young people and centering voices, even when it means like I need to remove myself, because those folks who know me know I'm like extremely old school. So I need to sometimes not be in the room because I want to stand by old policies and practices that don't work. But I'm all about how we center youth voice. But I think the larger conversation is not just for young people, but across the board. How do we center health and wellness? How do we center self-care? How do we, you know, this whole idea that now radical transformation begins with taking care of yourself. So, you know, like that is a radical concept, right? To prioritize yourself in this work. I think we have to, that's another one of the narrative shifts that we've got to do, that if you're not hurting and struggling, then you're not down with the cause. But if you are hurting and struggling, it's going to be hard for you to help somebody else.
Did either Director Henderson or
I want to second that 100%.
Director Simile, I think you're cutting out on us again.
What I was going to say, can you all hear me? Give me a thumbs up.
Yeah, go for it.
What I want to say is,
stop talking.
what I want to say is, when we talk about defunding or reallocation, I want to talk about radical reinvestment. And radical reinvestment means shifting power, shifting resources into folks who never had that sort of funding anyway, and they had to build systems themselves in order to sustain their own community. And when it comes to, we see that specifically in mental health resources for our Black and Brown folks. And I think we have a moral responsibility to think differently how we can center culturally affirmative and competent mental health services across the board and starting much younger, and also breaking down any stigmas when it comes.
Can I just bring that full circle? Because as you talk about those budgets and those approaches, because I think I just want to contextualize it. This is part of the reason why when we start talking about budgets, that the police defund movement and conversations come up, because the police department in most cities is the singular most expensive line expense for these budgets, right? So when you talk about challenges that a city has for anything, with homelessness, with mental health, with COVID responses, with potholes, you first start with police budget, right? And heretofore, many of those budgets have been sacrosanct, meaning we don't touch them, we don't approach them. That's just a block of you get what you get, and we start off with half, a third, or a significant portion of your budget just goes into policing in the past. And part of the conversation now is, what are we paying for? What services do we get? And are communities satisfied with that? And by communities, we have to expand that definition of communities, and we need all communities to be satisfied or have a seat at the table or a voice at the table, redefining what policing needs to look like for the entirety of that city and the entirety of that budget. And so I just wanted to connect the dots as while we're talking about these budgets, part of any of the budget, regardless of what you try and do at a local municipality, includes a conversation from law enforcement, because it's the singular most expensive budget item for most cities. So anyway.
But I would say we have heard across the board that folks are like, we shouldn't stop at the police department in terms of the reallocation. Right. So I appreciate you saying that. I mean, again, if we look at other systems that, you know, by some other folks' definitions are not effective or causing more harm than good to certain communities, whether that is the school district or whether that is environmental justice or any of these other places, like, you know, I just think about back in the day with the one-room schoolhouse that everybody was in, that probably turned out more doctors, Black doctors back in the day than we're turning out today, right? So that there is something to be said for some supporting community values and listening to folks and prioritizing the strength and power that lies in our cultural norms and who our families, what those values are.
Thank you. I now want to open up the questions to the public. If you have any questions, feel free to drop it in the Q&A section. I have a host of other questions that I can ask myself, but I know you rather have your own questions answered. I'm seeing one in the chat right now for Director Simley. Is the Office of Racial Equity going to help with reparation conversations to help come up with some type of recommendations from your office if possible?
Short answer to that is yes, but this process is being led by Supervisor Walton and Director Davis. And prior to the pandemic, we had a number of community-based conversations to get directly from community what does it mean when we say reparations and what does that actually look like? And moving forward, we are still doing that gathering, because what that looks like is not going to be defined by me. It's going to be defined by the folks who are closest to the pain. And we need to make sure that we're centering Black San Franciscans in that conversation. And what comes out of that, I'll be happy to leverage the power of this office to make that a reality for folks. But that initial process is going to happen directly from the lives and lived experiences from our community members. And then we can use that to help push on the inside as well.
Thank you. And how can CBOs typically not involved in these efforts best support family and community empowerment in this time?
I mean, I think that there are a lot of different ways to support and engage. Definitely through the HRC, we've been convening groups and trying to meet with community stakeholders as well as service providers and connect the two. But I think the most important thing is to actually, again, what we've heard through these conversations, whether it's around reparations or reallocation of SFPD dollars, is a lot of communities feel invisible or silenced or unheard, right? And so how are we actually making those connections? I think the best way is to actually get involved with the community, right? Like whatever it is that you're doing, like thinking about your outreach plan, thinking about how you connect with the folks that are most impacted. And sometimes that requires a lot more work and resources and staff time than we typically have the resources for. But to build credibility, to build relationships, and to actually affect change, we need to connect with the people. And that is not something, I think Shakira and I have had a lot of conversations about, I can't just transfer relationships. She can't just transfer relationships. We all have to actually make those connections on our own and build that trust. I can maybe introduce you to somebody, but I definitely can't make them be your friend or value you. And so that's something that only comes from the person to person. I mean, that's my.
And I would say, I would elevate that and say that these are things that don't happen on their own. If you want to connect with community, you need to do that with an intentionality, specifically with CBOs, and I would say for government agencies as well. You don't get to take an aspirational approach to connecting to community by opening your doors. You need to reach out and figure out, what is my outreach plan? How am I partnering with other agencies that I see that have done it well, and how can I be at the table with them? How can I lend my voice to support the work that they're doing and uplift it? Those things don't happen by accident. I think we need to be clear about who we're trying to outreach to, and those conversations need to be driven by, how do I connect, not just having access and having volume of services and numbers, but how do I specifically touch disenfranchised communities? How am I connected to the trans community? How am I connected to the monolingual community? How am I connected to the Black community? How am I connected to the reentry community? These things don't happen by accident. And if you don't have a plan to connect, to coordinate, and to be involved in those communities, then you're missing opportunities to address your real mission and your core values. So I just don't think it happens on accident.
Awesome, thank you.
But when we get back to the reparations, I'm ready for that too. I've been waiting with my deposit checks, so just let me know.
Are you making a deposit, or are you like giving us money to deposit?
That's what I was trying to figure out.
No, that's a deposit slip. I'm ready for mine.
You said deposit check. I was like, okay then.
I'm standing on the shoulder of ancestors. I got a lot of reparations coming my way for San Francisco. I'm ready.
Come on, I'm ready too. So do you think this work needs to start with acknowledging all parts of the collective apparatus that allows oppressive systems to continue? Like, how do we align the budget approaches and planning in different ways that across all agencies and departments that are super connected to impacting the community is actually involved?
That is Shakira. I mean, that is part of what we are hoping, and I'm glad to see our longtime friend Devi Zinzavadia on with us. But I think that Shakira, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which side you sit on, has has been charged with how do we rethink the budget, and how do we rethink priorities in terms of equity, which sometimes may mean not equal shares of things, but it may mean we give more over here and less over here. Shakira.
So I think that's going to be a lot of difficult conversations. And one concept that Director Davis and I were talking about a couple of days ago was that of implosion. And sometimes in order for things to shift and change, that starts from the inside. And I want to, I've been really simmering and thinking about that. And, we bring our full selves to work. And I'm aware that I'm a part of this cog or this system, but also there are a lot of people like me who want our public services to be a lot better and know how to push for that. So it's important to make sure that we're building a movement inside and outside to help push for those different things. And I would also say that we need y'all. Like, the budget season and those decisions are going to be made over the next couple of months. Who represents you? Are your needs included in their budget? Do they have a participatory budget process? So this is your elected representative. And how are your needs for your neighborhood or your community included in their plans? And like, those are the questions that you all need to also be asking to make the job a little bit easier for those on the inside to say, who are pointing and saying, look, we need to make sure that we're prioritizing the folks who are close to the pain, needs to be close to the power, and budgets have tremendous power in setting priorities for years to come. So it's not sexy or glamorous, but it's deeply important. And your tax dollars and your work helps fuel that.
So I'm seeing some questions in the chat that's going back to this idea of defunding the police. And I just want to get your thoughts, Paul. What is your short, independent analysis on the recent protest of defunding the police?
I think it's an important voice that needs to be heard. And I think that it's something that we need to be able to look at those budgets and shift those budgets. So, and they're fair questions, right? Like, why are we spending money for things that we don't want, right? Like, so just in the past few months, I saw plenty of stories about folks and first line responders to the COVID crisis saying that they don't have PPE and they don't have equipment. I didn't hear one police department saying that they didn't have helmets for the riots. I didn't hear one law enforcement agency saying that they didn't have what they needed to address insurgencies on the streets. And so I think we have to address those conversations and talk about what our dollars are paying for. And if we are in jurisdictions that have tanks and body armor and militarized weapons that departments are receiving and using and or paying for, what does that mean? How are our tax dollars supporting that and sustaining that? And instead, how can we be informed and articulate what we do want our tax dollars paying for, what we do want law enforcement doing? And I think for the first time, or in a new way, we're coming to the realization that it's just as important that we tell law enforcement agencies what we don't want them to do and what they can't do. That's just as important as us telling them what we want them to do. And that has to be articulated and defined. And I think that's the conversation that communities are having. And that's what's behind, I think, a large part of the movement. And certainly there's not a singular answer, right? It's a spectrum when we talk about what defund the police means to you as an advocate, or you as a listener, or me as a speaker and a presenter. But to me, what it means is an open door and an inclusionary conversation with all communities about what it means to be paying for your tax dollars to define public safety. And I think at the end of the day, that is a good thing, that we shouldn't be afraid to have difficult conversations. And police departments and law enforcement departments, like every other department, should have to defend and present their budgets that, like other departments have done in the past. I just feel like because we are at this crossroads, that we have a real opportunity to really examine how those costs are translated from the dollars that we're spending, and to have an honest and open conversation about the prioritized approaches that we have as citizens and as cities about, and again, you don't have to be a citizen, I'm just saying the cities speaking on behalf of folks about how those tax dollars are then being spent for healthcare, for mental health, for reentry, for housing, for homelessness, and all of these other things. Like there's already a default balance, but having an informed conversation that is inclusionary, I think, has the potential to change outcomes and redefine our cities in ways that heretofore we have not, that heretofore communities have not, that heretofore voters and people that have concerns about these things have not. And now those voices are being heard. That's why we're seeing this isn't a singular thing happening in Minnesota or Chicago or Maryland. It's all throughout this country as cities are and individuals are waking up to the possibility of having a conversation about their budget during a recession, during COVID-19, during civil unrest related to justice reforms. At the end of the day, I think it's a good thing, and one that puts us in a better position and a stronger position because of the voices that we're raising and the ideas that we're presenting at the various tables. So.
Awesome. Well, I want to just recognize that we have come to the hour, and the conversation doesn't stop. I think this is just the tip of the iceberg in us meeting about this. So I strongly advise the people who are watching us ourselves to continue to educate ourselves, continue having the conversations around race, equity, and accountability, because that's where it starts, in the community, in our conversations with our parents, with our friends. But yes, I just want to definitely thank you, each and every one of you, for showing up, for not letting Zoom stop your conversation, to stop the heat coming. And I just want to definitely say this thank you overall for just being here. And I want to say thank you for everyone in the audience who has spent the last hour with us. We are so grateful for your questions, thoughts. In closing, we want to say be safe, be healthy, and wear your mask. All right, bye, y'all.
I'm just going to give one more closing word, and that's, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. I really appreciate you taking the time. You're all incredibly busy. So thank you, and thank you for bringing this really important conversation to MOAD. And like Al said, it's just the beginning. It's not the end. So everybody out there, please keep talking to each other, to people you know and love, and to people you don't know.
Right.
So a couple people have asked if this conversation was recorded. It is recorded. It has been live streaming to Facebook Live and YouTube Live at the MOAD YouTube and Facebook pages. And as soon as we finish, there will be a recording archived there on the MOAD YouTube page. So please look for it there and share it with friends. We have been doing all kinds of free programming here at MOAD since the closure of our doors, and we will continue to do that and continue to connect with everyone out there as well as we can. If you would like to donate to MOAD, any size donation will help. You can do that by going to our website at moadsf.org, or you can donate on your cell phone. You can text 56512 and write the word Moad SF, and then you will get a link to donate. So thank you all. Thank you for the work that you're doing. I'm incredibly grateful and really in awe of all of you. So,
And support Black artists as well. I just didn't want to miss the opportunity to share.
Go ahead and shout out that art. Tell us about that art back there.
I'm just saying. I try to take the opportunity whenever I can to showcase Black artists and Black art with intentionality that I'm never afraid to talk about, because we can't expect other people to value it more than us. And I didn't want to miss an opportunity, especially with this art audience, to talk about taking some of this time while we're working from home to support Black art and Black voices and Black audiences. So
well, across the board, I would like to say Paul's showing his art. I've got my books back here. Poetry, and I've got a little bit of Maya and Christian Robinson, who is an artist that illustrates many of these books. So, you know, there's a lot of ways to support.
Yeah, I'm gonna shout out Black people.
Right. Well, this is how you
Black
develop and
chefs.
cultivate allies.
Black farmers.
Oh, Black farmers.
Yeah, it's
Come on, bring it up.
time for dinner. We definitely need to like highlight the Black farmers and all those folks, but all our people of color. We're not exclusionary.
Yeah. And the LGBT farmers and LGBT artists and writers and all of that. Right. Because the more people are educated, the more that they can do. As I've been telling all of my friends and audiences, that being an ally is an action and not a title. And you don't know the action to take if you're not informed. And it's not just my job to educate you when I come into the room or because you contacted me to let me know. You can do all of this yourself on your computer in a museum with a book, through some poetry, at your farmer's market, in the store. There are all these different ways, and I think we missed.
Well, somebody asked, Paul, I don't know if you saw that, or Michael, about allyship and whether you can just say you're an ally.
Right.
No, you cannot, because you're not. If you are just an ally and you sit behind your computer screen and feel like I'm an ally, it's not enough, because you are perpetuating the systemic problems that got us to this point. You are only an ally if you are taking action, and you have to do more than just the education of yourself. You need to talk to your peers. I mean, not that I have the singular answer, but in my opinion, I don't give ally credit unless there's action behind it.
Right.
For people that are doing more than just saying, I support you and your equality. Yeah. Well, thank you, but I need more than your support. I need you to advocate. I need you to vote. I need you to be at the table. I need you to be part of the system. I need you to hire. I need you to read. I need you to collect art. I need all these things. Show me the action to measure it, and show me those changes and the distinctions, and then I will bestow upon you the title of ally. So I need to like make a little thing so I can pass them out like little stickers and put on people.
Can you put that in a memo?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah. It's going to be a little, like, not the scarlet letter A, it's going to be a black A from me. That's the ally sticker that people get to walk around with pride. Mine will be made by a Black artist.
Do that. Don't be up here making recommendations and suggestions, then to get off the call like, oh no, I want the allyship memo, and I'll work on the stickers.
Yeah, I got you on the stickers.
With the Black artist, though, can do it. So
I'll do it.
Great. Thank you all so much for paying attention. So this is great. I'm so glad Moad's doing this.
Yeah.
I've been watching all of these artists on the Moad Talks, and I'm so excited that I get to be in the talk, even though I'm not a good artist. I'm not an artist at all, but I can talk now. So that's good.
That's your art. You are an artist. It's right there.
I'm not going to show you my purple sheep. Shakira has seen some of my
yes, I was about to say.
I do some really lovely trees.
And flowers. You make flowers. I like
it. I'm trying.
And flowers. And collage.
A collage. I'm definitely branching out. Hopefully one day I'll be on your wall, Paul.
That's self-care right there.
You send it to me, I will put it on TV. I will put you, I'm about to make you a star.
Are you going to put it on MSNBC?
Yeah, I will.
Come on.
I promise.
I don't think I'm quite ready yet for
Fun
fame.
time. You never know. You don't need to doubt yourself. We as community support you and your voice, whatever it is. So if you want to produce something, I will put it in a frame and show it to the world.
Well, let me
Listen.
take another couple months to practice my art before I start framing it.
Yeah. You'd be surprised at the things that people send me.
No, I wouldn't, because you've shared some. But hey, Michelle, all art is good. You know what? I am proud of myself. I have progressed from stick figures to tulips and sheep. So
Yes.
I'm like,
Oh, we love that.
This is the evolution.
and landscapes, so and trees. My palm trees are amazing.
Well, you're going to be on our In the Artist Studio program soon, Cheryl.
Yeah, I'm.
Oh, perfect timing.
That and my gardening, I am trying to like take, to take moments away from work. So I've been.
Okay, Black farmer, Black artist. Cheryl's trying to check all the boxes.
I know. I got to
nobody
with Bryant Terry on Fridays.
I'm not ready for farmer yet, but I have one little peat pot that has grown 2 branches or 2 leaves. So, I'm excited.
Okay, that's more than
That's self-care we like to see, all right?
I just got to keep it up. How many days? 28 days until it's a habit. We'll see if I can.
All right. Thank you all so much.
Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.